All right, let's do this. If you're getting ready for your certification exam, then you are in exactly the right place. We are about to go through a super high-yield, no-fluff review of antibody identification. My only goal here? To make sure you walk into that exam feeling like you absolutely own this stuff. Ready? Let's get into it.
So picture this. You're in the lab, and boom, a positive antibody screen pops up. This is it. This is that moment where all the bookwork becomes real. It's not just a result, it's the start of an investigation. So what's step one? Well, we start with our single most important tool.
And that tool, of course, is the antiglobulin test, which you'll probably hear called the Coombs test. Honestly, this is the absolute bedrock of antibody ID. If you can master this test, I promise you, you are way more than halfway there. It's all about making the invisible visible.
So how in the world does it work? Well, imagine these little antibodies just coating the red blood cells, right? They're there, but the cells are still too far apart to actually clump up where we can see them. The antiglobulin reagent, our AHG, is like a microscopic matchmaker. It comes in, grabs onto those antibodies, and literally pulls the cells together into clumps, agglutination, that we can actually see. Pretty cool, huh?
Okay, so the procedure itself, it's kind of like a four-step dance. First, we incubate. This gives the antibodies a chance to find and latch on to the antigens on our test cells. Then, and listen up, because this is huge, comes the wash step. This is, without a doubt, the most critical, most tested on, and most common place to make a mistake. After the wash, you add your AHG, give it a spin, and read the result. But let's circle back to that wash step. It's that important.
The why here is everything. Why are we so obsessed with washing? Because if you have any of those unbound antibodies just floating around free in the test tube, they're going to mob our AHG reagent and neutralize it before it ever has a chance to get to the red cells. And what happens then? You get a false negative. A false negative that could lead to a fatal transfusion reaction. So remember this for your exam and for your career. A proper wash saves lives. Simple as that.
Now we use this AHG principle in two main ways. The direct test, the DAT, is for when we're checking for antibodies that have already attached to red cells inside the patient's body. That's in vivo. It's like investigating a crime that's already happened. The indirect test, which is what our antibody screen is when we do the mixing ourselves in the test tube, in vitro. We're trying to see if an antibody is even there in the patient's plasma.
So, when would a DAT be positive? It almost always points to one of these four big scenarios. You could have a newborn whose cells are coated with their mom's antibodies, a patient having a bad reaction to transfused blood, someone whose own immune system is mistakenly attacking their red cells, or even a reaction caused by a drug. Every single one of these is a serious clinical situation. All right, now that we've got the test fundamentals down, let's put on our detective hats. The first results we get from our panel start giving us clues about who our culprit antibody might be. And the biggest clue of all, it's all about the temperature. Check it out. If you see reactions happening at room temp or in the cold, that's called the immediate spin, or IS phase. Your brain should immediately scream IgM. These are big, bulky antibodies that are usually, and I stress usually, not clinically significant. But if the reaction only pops up after you've incubated at body temp, 37 degrees, and you needed that AHG to see it, now you're hunting an IgG antibody. These guys are the ones we worry about. They're smaller, they can cross the placenta, and they are almost always clinically significant. This is a massive fork in the road. Okay, next clue, reaction strength. Some antibodies are a little bit picky. They'll react like crazy with cells that have a double dose of their target antigen. We call that homozygous, but they might react super weakly, or not at all, with cells that only have a single dose, heterozygous. This is dosage, and it is a classic trap. You could easily accidentally rule out a really important antibody just because it looked negative against a heterozygous cell. So who are these sneaky characters known for showing dosage? This slide right here is a straight-up exam flashcard. The big four you have to know are MNS, RH, KID, and Duffy. When you're working through a panel and trying to rule these guys out, you absolutely have to use homozygous cells or you can miss them. Just burn this list into your memory. So what happens when the first few clues just aren't cutting it? You know, maybe you have multiple antibodies all reacting at once, or a tricky autoantibody is making a mess of things. Well, that's when we have to break out the advanced toolkit to crack these really tough cases.
First step in the toolkit, enzymes. Think of them like tiny little molecular scissors that can snip specific antigens right off the red cell surface. So how does that help? Well, let's say your panel is a total mess. If you treat your cells with an enzyme and suddenly some of those reactions disappear, you're probably looking at a Duffy or an M&S antibody. If the reactions actually get stronger, now you're thinking RH or KID. Here's a great mnemonic for the exam. Duffy and M&S are destroyed by enzymes.
Next up are two techniques that people get mixed up all the time, adsorption and elution. Here's how to think about it. Adsorption is when you want to pull an antibody out of the serum. It's like using a magnet to pull all the pesky iron filings out of a sandbox so you can see if there are any dangerous glass beads left behind. Elution is the opposite. You've got the antibody stuck to the red cells and you want to pull it off to identify it. This is what you do to figure out what antibody caused a transfusion reaction or a case of HDFA.
Okay, we have covered the tools, we have covered the techniques. Now let's do a rapid-fire rundown of the most wanted list. These are the clinically significant IgG antibodies that I can practically guarantee you're going to see on your exam.
First up, the undisputed heavyweight champion, the RH system, especially anti-D. It's IgG, it's a huge cause of nasty transfusion reactions and severe hemolytic disease of the fetus and newborn. Key facts to remember: enzymes make it stronger, and it doesn't usually bind complement.
Next, we have KEL. Anti-KEL is a very big deal. Why? Because the KEL antigen is what we call highly immunogenic. That just means it's incredibly good at ticking off the immune system and making an antibody. In fact, it's second only to the D antigen in that respect. It's a major player in both transfusion reactions and HDFN.
Then there's Duffy. What do you absolutely need to remember about Duffy? Number 1, enzymes destroy its antigens. We already covered that. And number 2, this is a super cool fact that'll help you remember it. People with the FYA anti-B phenotype are naturally resistant to certain kinds of malaria. How cool is that? And of course, Duffy antibodies can cause some serious problems with transfusions and pregnancies.
And that brings us to what might just be the most treacherous antibody of them all, KID. Why? Because KID antibodies are just notorious. They're infamous for causing delayed hemolytic transfusion reactions. They can be weak, they show dosage, and, get this, they can fade away over time, making them a nightmare to detect. Then the patient gets transfused, and bam, they come roaring back. So if there's one thing you take away about this antibody, it's this: you never, ever underestimate KID.
Now, all these principles we've talked about, they're timeless. But let's be real. Most labs these days are using automated methods. So let's take a quick look at how these fundamentals translate before we wrap things up. The technology looks different, but the goal is the same. In gel, a positive reaction means the agglutinated cells get trapped at the top of this gel matrix. You'll see a solid red line up top. In solid phase, the test wells are pre-coated with antigens, so a positive result is this beautiful, smooth, monolayer of red cells spread all across the well. It's just a different way of seeing the exact same antigen-antibody reaction.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're using a glass test tube, a gel card, or a solid phase plate. The mission, our fundamental responsibility, never ever changes. This whole complicated, fascinating process, it all boils down to one thing: find the antibody, name the antibody, and give that patient safe, compatible blood. That's the job.
So I'm going to leave you with one last question, just to make sure the most important point of all really sticks. Out of all the bad guys we talked about today, which one has that sneaky disappearing act that makes it the #1 most dangerous culprit when it comes to delayed reactions? I think you know the answer. Now go crush that exam.